live sports streaming, live sports athletic events. How do you produce them? How do you stream them? What do you do? And they can get kind of complicated. There's a lot to go into them. There's a lot of, sometimes you need multiple cameras, you need high action, high speed cameras, and of course you have large distances and great areas to cover sometimes. Sometimes you're out even on a rowboat. So how do you do all that? Well, today we're going to dive in deep with the expert, Imre Halevi from Harvard, and he's going to tell us all about how Harvard Athletics and the Harvard Athletics Department streams their live sports programs. He is one of the best in the business. I'm very excited to have him. It's going to be a fun show today. Definitely stick around. Welcome to another episode of Wirecast Live. Welcome to another episode of Wirecast Live. I'm your host, Andrew Haley, and it is a beautiful Thursday, and we are about to have another great show. If you don't know what we do here on the show, if this is your first time tuning in, you should definitely subscribe. You can hit the like button on Facebook. You can hit the live notifications if you know how to set that, or if you're watching on YouTube or Periscope, that is other ways you can definitely get a hold of us. We're live every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, and we talk about everything to do with live video production and live streaming. We bring on experts in various fields, things that we may not know so much about, but they know a lot about, to teach you tips, tricks, and lots of educational material all around this topic of live streaming and live production. Obviously, what we do and what we know is live streaming, and we make the software Wirecast, which we will do tips and tutorials on during our learning sessions after we bring on our guest. So you can always come here and ask questions. It's a great place to hang out, get more information, and get the latest news on everything to do with live streaming. So if you are curious, that's how to find us. Now, with that being said, next week we have a bye. We will not be doing a show next week. We're actually going to be out at NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters Show 2017 in Las Vegas, at booth number SL3316. That's the South Lower Hall, booth 3316. If you are out in Las Vegas next week, starting on Monday through Thursday, we would love to see you. Please stop by the booth. We will have full Wirecast demo stations. We'll be showing another version of Wirecast with some new features. You should definitely come by and check it out, which we will be talking about, announcing over the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Lots of exciting news there. But you can get a preview of it if you happen to be out in Las Vegas. We'd love to see you. Other than that, no show next week, and because of NAB, and I think that's all the news we have for you today. If you always want to check out what's going on at Telestream or with Wirecast, you can head over to telestream.net/events, which is on the screen here, which is a great place to learn about upcoming things, upcoming live shows, events, webinars, and so forth. So May should be pretty busy, but for now, we're taking a little bit easy to get ready for one of the biggest shows of the year for our industry. Okay, with that aside, I would like to dive into our main topic for today, which is how do you better stream live sports, and how do the pros do it? How do one of the top universities in the world handle live streams? Now, there's nobody better to talk about this than Imre Halevi, the Director of Multimedia for the Department of Athletics at Harvard University. And he's joining us live from Harvard itself, I believe, out on the East Coast. Imre, are you there?
I am here. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you. It's getting a little late in your day there, so I appreciate you sticking around for this.
No problem.
So Imre, for those who may not be up on what you do, you've been out there. You talk about this topic. I've seen you on some panels and some interviews, and I really have been impressed with what you've been doing out there. I think, and particularly how I first came to learn of you was your excellent blog posts. You have some wonderful posts that you've put together on tips on how you guys do it, recommended equipment, how you solve challenges like bringing clocks and timers and so forth into Wirecast. And actually, in honor of that, we thought we would do a tutorial for our learning session after our interview today. We'll be talking about the 3 ways you can bring in clocks into Wirecast, and some of those are directly from your tips and things that you guys have done out there. So I just want for folks who may not have read your blog posts or may not have seen you speak before, just give them a little background on who you are, what's your training, and how did you get into live streaming and become the director of multimedia at the Department of Athletics there?
Sure. So I kind of fell into it, which I think is a common story. I didn't study this. I have a degree in history and a master's degree in marketing. Um, but I happened to be at the right place at the right time in all my previous iterations. When I was a student at Boston University, they opened a new ice hockey arena there with a video board, and they were looking for someone to play around with it a little bit and try to figure out video production on the video board. I moved on to Northeastern University after that, where I did my master's, and they were looking for someone to play around with videos and start up some streaming. And so it's just something that's developed over time over the last 10, 12 years. But I never studied it per se. I never went to school for it. Though there's lots to learn. I've always learned by asking people, by finding people who have done this before me or people who I've seen who've done a good job. And I just cold them or cold email them and say, hey, this is who I am. And I have, 1 through 10 questions. Can you help me figure out what I'm doing here? And that's really how I learned.
Yeah, I think, well, that's one of the best ways, right? There's no better education than just on-the-job training, right? And figuring it out as you go. And I think that's led you to a place where you really can offer people very practical advice and tips in terms of setting up their own live streams and sports streams. When it's funny, you mentioned that you've kind of come at it from Boston University and then Northeastern, and now you're doing it for Harvard. What has sort of changed? Do you suddenly have a much larger budget to play around with now that you're at a very well-off university that in theory can throw money behind these things? Or are you still finding that you really have to be as scrappy as you always were?
I don't think it's about the money. I think Harvard has a lot more, but it's a lot more sports. When I was at Northeastern, we had 18 sports teams that we had to approach and figure out if we can stream, and Harvard has 42. Mm-hmm. It has the largest Division I athletics department in the country, and so that's the challenge. There's money involved, obviously, because you need to buy equipment, but it's trying to figure out how you can handle 42 teams, which ones are practical to stream, which ones are not, because some of our teams are sailing and skiing and golf and cross country, which are really difficult. And we don't stream those. We stream some other challenging ones like rowing, but we've decided not to tackle sailing and golf for now. But it's trying to figure out, economies of scale. How can we use the equipment we have, or which equipment can we buy that would help support us across the board? Mm-hmm. Because we have the sports that are generally accepted to be bigger because they have bigger audiences, because they're ticketed, because they have more fans come to venues. Sports like football and basketball. And for us, it's also ice hockey and lacrosse. Those are big sports, and we do big productions for them. Mm-hmm. And we have a control room, and we have a lot that we do for them. But then there are the rest of the sports for which we want to do a really good job. And my challenge coming in was trying to figure out what could we do that could really cater to all these sports, even though some of them are in fields, some are in a pool, some are, as you said, on the rivers. There's just so much variety in everything we try to cover.
Right. And roughly out of those 42 teams, how many are you currently covering?
32.
32. That's not bad. You almost got it.
I know. I'm constantly trying to raise it up a little bit more. I think like outdoor track is something we can possibly get into, but 32 out of 42 is where we are.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive. So roughly in a calendar year, how many events are you streaming?
Say average around 250.
250. Wow, it's very impressive. So do you find that, and does this not just include the athletics department, official Harvard teams, but is it also including club teams?
No, this is varsity teams. We also have lots of club teams and lots of intramural teams, but because of the sheer amount of varsity teams we haven't tackled club and intramurals yet. Mm-hmm. But no, this is just varsity, and it's just Harvard teams' home games. Mm-hmm. Though every now and then we do have other teams come to play here, and so if they ask, we try to provide support. We have some professional soccer teams that play here every now and then, and if they ask us to produce some games for them, we do that as well.
Wow! And how many people in your department are working on live streaming and under you in terms of how many people? What's the team that you have to work with in terms of size to cover
I say,
32
see all
teams
the
and
people
250 live
behind
events.
there.
I know. You're just overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's I have two full-time interns who are here on 10-month rotations. And so those are students or recent graduates who want to go into this field on purpose and as a career, I mean. And they do this for academic credit and they stay with us 10 months and they share the full-time responsibilities with me. They edit videos here in the office and they do a lot of streaming, a lot of directing of our productions. In addition, we have a team of about 45 part-time game day staff. Those are students or recent graduates from local colleges, some from Harvard, some from Boston University, some from Northeastern, some from many others. And those are the students who actually operate the equipment during game days, who run the cameras or the replay machines or graphics or are commentators or audio or anything like that. They're people who we train and on specific equipment and have them do the actual work while we give them instructions on game days.
How do you coordinate that many volunteers, between just the three of you and make sure that the commentators are where they need to be, the cameramen are properly trained? I mean, that seems like a very big logistical challenge.
It is. They're not, first of all, they're not volunteers. We do pay them, not a lot, but we try to compensate them for helping us out. But we try to plan ahead. That's my number one goal. We have this Google spreadsheet that has all our games from the beginning of every year till as much as we know, because in the beginning of the year, you don't necessarily know the spring sports, but as much as we know. And we try to schedule people ahead of time. We say, okay, well, obviously, this is September 1st. Obviously, there are games this week, but there are also games in October and November. And we need you to commit. We need you to think ahead, figure out when you're available, and sign up for all these games. And it really helps us manage this so that we don't have to start from scratch every week and say, okay, this week we have 10 games and we have to start staffing them. We know that we have a staff, and all we have to do week to week is pre-production stuff, prepare graphics and prepare videos we want to showcase, and deal with last-minute staffing changes, people who cancel. But we really try to look ahead and schedule as much as we can.
And so let's tackle the big sports, the basketball, football, and ice hockey, and lacrosse, as you're mentioning. The scale of the production must be quite a bit different from, the 2 or 3 man teams that might go out and do something like a softball or rowing or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how much staff gets allotted to each event. But, with something like a football game, a home Harvard football game, you're working in the stadium there, and you've got quite a bit of equipment, you've got quite a bit of staff, quite a bit of cameras, and can you tell me a little bit how many people are working an event like that?
Sure. Let's do a football game. So we have someone directing the game. We have a technical director who operates our video switcher. We have a replay operator, we have a graphics operator, and a scorebug operator. Those are all in our control room. We have 4 or 5 cameras, so camera operators around the facility. We have 2 commentators. We have an audio person. And then we're also in charge, since we do video stuff, we're also in charge of video boards. And so our football stadium and our hockey rink have video boards. And so we have someone as an assistant director position in our control room in charge of the video board feed. Most of the time, they show similar to what the rest of us are producing for TV or for streaming. And then when we go to commercial or we show things on TV that are not really relevant for people in venue, they can cut away and show dance cam or kiss cam or out-of-town scores or stats or things that are more relevant for people who are sitting in the venue watching the game as opposed to people watching at home.
Right. So by my count, that was about 12 or 13 people.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And so would you say that when you have an event like that, you're not just streaming it to an online venue? Maybe that's part of it. But are you also providing a feed, a broadcast feed for television, for local television, for network television?
So by default, all our streams, from the very, very big, which we'll call football, to the smallest productions we do, which is rowing maybe, which is 1 camera, all of those go to the central website called the Ivy League Digital Network. And that's a website shared by all 8 Ivy League schools. And people who are fans of Ivy League sports or Ivy League teams or any of the Ivy League schools, they can go there and watch any of our streams. So that's the default. And for our big productions, we've also partnered with local and regional networks. In our area, we have a network called NESN, New England Sports Network. We've also partnered with ESPN3 and other networks to take our productions as they are and put them on their air. So if you turn on NESN, which typically shows Boston Bruins, which is our professional hockey team, and Boston Red Sox, our baseball team, when you turn it on and happen to see a Harvard hockey game, it's not because NESN sent a crew, sent a truck, sent a satellite truck, or anything like that. It's because we do the production in-house and just transmit it to them.
Yeah. And are you responsible for anything regarding the ad breaks or anything like that? Because, when you get into that network-based distribution, you're starting to talk about ad breaks and things like that. Are you needing to, how does that work with, something like a Wirecast stream to Facebook? It's a bit of a different animal.
It is different. And so by default, we take commercial breaks for our big sports just to get us in the habit of doing it. And so even if we're not on TV, even if we're just streaming and commercial breaks aren't needed and we're doing a hockey game, we still take 3 one-minute commercial breaks per hockey period. We have our own commercials. We have our own sponsors. We get the coaches in the habit of taking breaks. It makes it easier for everyone. When we're on TV, we share the breaks. We have an agreement with the networks we partner with so that X% of the breaks are our breaks, X% are their breaks. And so when it's our break, we run commercials from our control room and people on TV see them. And it's when network breaks, they run commercials from their master control and people get to see those. So we try to share the allotted time.
Got it.
And as you mentioned, Facebook Live, obviously games that we put on Facebook Live through Wirecast are not also on TV. That would create way too many problems, from rights issues to, as you mentioned, commercial issues. And so that's different. We do, as you mentioned, play around with Facebook Live a little bit, see what we can do there, and then we make sure that we don't have commercials.
Got it. So the Ivy League Sports Network, Digital Network, that will run in-stream ads. That's basically like the broadcast feed itself.
Yes.
Okay. And then people can watch that digitally on demand, online that way.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so, what are you finding? So let's step down a tier here and go more into the online distribution. Maybe you're just streaming to the digital network, or maybe you're also. And let's take a second to talk about the digital network. Is that it's a streaming and hosting site and server for everyone in the Ivy League? And are you guys running that through a CDN of some kind? Is it through Wowza, through Akamai, or how are you setting that up?
We're partnering with a company called New Lion, which does a lot of digital networks for conferences and for schools and website hosting, and they manage the back end because the website there's a lot there. It's not just for live streaming; it's also for on-demand content, and so they manage the back end. They manage everything. They use multiple CDNs, including the ones you mentioned. But luckily, we don't have to worry about it. They take care of the back end.
You just provide them a high quality RTMP.
Yes, okay. And they do adaptive streaming. So we send them the highest we can or the highest we think is reasonable. And then if you're watching on your phone on a 4G network out in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get the 3 megabits per second, 720p feed. Right. It's going to be downgraded, so it's something that you can support.
Yeah. Do you often find that you're streaming 720 to them, or do you is it more often 1080?
720p, 30, 3 megabits per second is the standard.
Okay.
Honestly, we haven't tried 1080 yet. I don't have a good reason why we haven't tried it. That's just, we've decided on 720. But I think it's coming. And I think more than 1080, what I'm really interested in trying out is 60 frames per second streaming.
I was going to ask you that. That was my next question.
I've seen some pro sports play around with that. I think the last Super Bowl, they tried it. And, with live sports, it really makes a difference. It makes a difference that, those extra frames, especially with slow motion replay and things you can see. And so I'd be more interested in that because people mostly watch now with their phones or on laptops, and 1080 versus 720, they won't necessarily see a big difference. But in frame rate, they definitely will.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes a big difference. And so you're looking at least possibly doubling up to a 6 megabit per second stream for that, roughly, if you're still doing 720. So, okay, well, do you find that your cameras are already ready for 60? Is that going to require a whole overhaul in terms of the other pieces of the equipment in your chain?
The cameras are all set. We have pretty good cameras. We use JVC cameras across the board, and they can all support 60 frames per second. So I'm not concerned there. It's about making sure our production equipment can support it, either in our control room with our switcher and replay, or for out of control room stuff where we use Wirecast and making sure that the capture devices we have to bring our feeds into Wirecast and that our CPUs can really support 60 frame per second feeds.
Right, and encoding them on the fly. So let's talk about a digital-only stream. We're getting into that, and you said you do RTMP to the digital network. You also might stream to a Facebook. You might stream. Is there anywhere else you stream besides those two digital destinations?
ESPN3 is a gray area because it's part of the ESPN family, but it's a digital-only platform, and so that's half streaming, half not. We played around a little bit with the newest version of Wirecast 7.5. You can stream directly to Periscope and to Twitter, and so I was playing with that the other day. And we haven't had full games to Twitter yet, but it's something we want to explore and see what we can get. Because it's very different than how things used to be. It used to be you stream to one central location and then spend all your time telling people where you are, drawing arrows and saying, this is where everyone should come. This is where I am.
Right.
And that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, you kind of just...
you have to produce the best show you can and then put it everywhere. and hope that it's where people are. People are on Facebook, so let's put it on Facebook. People are on Twitter, let's put it on Twitter. People are on ESPN, let's put it on ESPN. We want to get in front of people's eyes and drawing those arrows and telling them to come where you are doesn't seem to be doing the trick anymore.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm actually going to pull up the Harvard Go Crimson Facebook page here. I'm going to throw this on the screen. And I was just kind of scrolling through some of the past videos that you've done in live events, and I was noticing that one of the most watched ones was your Harvard men's lacrosse game on March 29th. Almost 6,000 people tuned in for that. So it definitely seems like, so was that a Facebook-only live event? Was that something that you were, or were you streaming in multiple locations?
This was to the Ivy League Digital Network and Facebook Live.
Okay. This is great. So is this all happened in the same stadium as well as your football stadium and lacrosse stadium?
Lacrosse happens at the same place as football. So we get to do a big production. We get to put many cameras everywhere and really spread out and use replays and lots of graphics and make sure that we have a good show.
Mm-hmm. What are you finding, because you are kind of going from the really big productions down to the little ones, like you said, rowing. What are some other challenging ones besides rowing that you have had to kind of come up with new systems and tackle new challenges, like the rowing one? You used the rowing example in your blog post. I highly recommend people go read that. But it was very interesting. You had to rig up a laptop. Then you had battery issues and battery power. You had to think about your bandwidth because you suddenly needed a cellular modem out in the boat or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about, that one and maybe a couple other sports that you've had to be creative with?
Sure. So the thing, before we talk about technical stuff, the thing we discovered, which I found very interesting and surprisingly not surprising, is that people are fans of specific sports. We have Harvard football fans and Harvard rowing fans and everything in between, but they don't always cross over. And so it's not like the rowing people are going to watch the football stream and compare to the rowing stream and vice versa, but they still care about it. The rowing people care about the rowing stream as much as the football people care about the football stream. And so they really don't concern themselves, nor should they, with the fact that we can't set up 5-6 cameras on a boat with instant replay and graphics and have
right.
Yeah. Obviously, that's not practical, but that's not their concern, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, where are your drone shots? Come on.
Yeah. They just want to see the best show that we can possibly do from wherever we are, and that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to be creative and bring as many elements as we can to wherever we are, and realizing that it's what people care about. People care about the specific sport. And so you mentioned rowing. That's been a challenge for us, obviously, because we're on a boat. And we have two types, since the blog post came out, we have two types of rowing streams that we do now. We have the really small one. We have this new JVC camera that has a character generator inside. So our scorebug and our clock and everything to follow the rowing stream is generated within the camera. And so all we do is have a camera and a camera operator there following the boat, operating the scorebug, and a commentator is feeding into the camera, and then the camera streaming using a bonded cellular solution. And then we have our bigger rowing productions, which is what you mentioned, which is where we have a laptop with Wirecast on a boat and a camera or two cameras feeding into the laptop. And then we get to add more graphics. We add to break videos between races. But you mentioned it, it's tough because you're on a boat, so things are going to get wet. And if you've ever used a MacBook Pro, they don't like getting wet. So that's always something we're dealing with. Battery life, because races start at 7 a.m. and then end around 10 a.m. And you're doing a lot with the computer. You have a uncompressed SDI feed going out. You have an uncompressed SDI feed going in. You have cameras going in. We sometimes we have a scoreboard going in. Sometimes we connect my phone. I take my phone and put Google Maps on it or Google Earth and feed it into the computer via USB, and then we see a little GPS dot tracking where we are on the river. And we put that as a layer on top so people see, because every rowing race is 2,000 meters, but it's very difficult to tell where you are unless you're really familiar with the course. So if you see the little dot moving around, and we put little pins so you can tell where you are.
Very good.
But that's very, very battery consuming. And so we've had to come up with all these solutions of external batteries for the MacBook Pros, or having two computers there, or trying to minimize CPU usage so we can get through it, because then it turns out that the end races are more important than the beginning races, and if we run out of battery before we get to the end,
right. It's a race. You got to pace yourself.
Exactly.
So have you found any silver bullets with regards to power supply, and do you have you rigged up a car battery with an inverter, a power inverter?
It was loud, and it was noisy and loud, and it was heavy, and it would get wet, and so we stopped using that. We're setting up for a Wirecast feed for rowing right now, and so I happen to have that next to me. We have these external batteries that support MacBook Pros. We got several of them, and so they're charging on my desk now, and we connect the power cable from the MacBook Pro to these batteries, and each battery provides another hour and a half. And so if we take a few, they're not heavy, if we take a few of those on the boat with us, suddenly that makes all the difference.
Now, one of the common issues with MacBook and laptops that I think people have found is that they are very capable of, because everything's dongle-based and peripheral-based, of sending out more power to peripheral devices than they can actually keep up with through their power supply or their battery. So even though you have it plugged in, it's draining the battery. Eventually, your battery your computer will die because it's got all these Thunderbolt devices plugged in, which are sucking up more power than it's actually taking in. So
absolutely, we've definitely seen that. I was looking at it. We were doing this last year, and I was looking and saying, "Why is the battery going down? It's plugged in." But no, you're absolutely right. And
did you find the right combination of what devices you absolutely can't plug in? What's too many, and the tipping point?
So we've been trying to do this. Interesting. We've been trying to bring in cameras wirelessly when we can. So set up a little Wi-Fi hotspot on the boat, and if we bring the camera in using RTSP, then you don't need something like an SDI to Thunderbolt device, and then it doesn't take power. And when we're not on the boat, we do Wirecast productions and on MacBook Pros for most of our sports. And so when we're somewhere else, when power might be an issue, or we're not sure if the laptop can handle it, we use a powered USB 3 hub and connect any USB 3 devices through that. So if we have several cameras that have SDI to USB 3 converters, we run them through the hub, and they take their power from the hub.
Right.
And that we've seen immediately take some of the load off the computer.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are some standard tools you like to have in your toolkit? Sounds like MacBook Pro laptops, powerful ones. You like Macs.
Like Macs.
What are some other, it sounds like maybe you were talking about some Magewell cards there.
Some we do. Our default ones are Blackmagic device mini recorders. So those take Thunderbolt in and SDI in and Thunderbolt out. Those are the ones we start off with. We find them to be very good quality, and the audio is always in sync with the other ones. Sometimes we've had some audio issues. When we need SDI out from the computer, sometimes when we go on a bonded cellular and go through our bonded cellular solution, or where we go to ESPN3 and we need an SDI out from Wirecast, and we use a Blackmagic Design mini monitor that allows us to take a Thunderbolt out and SDI from there. And we do use some of the Magewell ones. We use Blackmagic Design Ultra Studio USB 3 to get SDI in. We use Blackmagic Design Intensity Shuttle to get HDMI in if we need any HDMI sources. So typically, whenever we go out to a production, we have all of those just in case. Even if it's just a one camera or two camera production, you never know, things fail. And I always like to connect one extra source just so we have it, so we can play around with it. If we have a 3 camera production and the computer can handle a 4th camera, great. Let's set up a fourth POV camera, stick it in a corner somewhere, and we can overlay graphics over it. Whenever we have time, I like to do these little things, and so I make sure that we have the equipment in place to support that.
That's cool. Any other, like, is there a field mixer you prefer? Do you like the Behringer USB field mixers? Like,
that's mostly what we use. We use the Behringer. We use some of the small Yamahas as well. We have Sennheiser headsets for our commentators. To get feeds into Wirecast, to get audio feeds into Wirecast, we typically get an output from our mixer and feed it into one of our cameras and get that through and embedded with the SDI feed. And so we always want to make sure we have the cables to support that.
So you prefer to always go through a camera first to marry the audio and video rather than try to have them brought back together in Wirecast through a separate input sources?
Yes, for two reasons. One, we typically use up all the inputs that Apple now lets us use on our MacBook Pros. I mean, it's getting less and less every year. And so, we have two USBs, two Thunderbolts, and often we use them all between Ethernet and cameras in and SDI out. And, USB hub is great, but it's all on the same bus. We really don't want to overwhelm it. And so if we bring audio through a camera, we don't need a separate USB in for audio. So that's one. Number two, to try to not overwhelm our computer, we don't ISO record on the computer typically. We stream, obviously, and we record the stream as well in the same quality. So if we stream a 3 megabit feed, we also record it locally so that we have an archive. But we record locally on the cameras as well in the highest quality they can do so that we have a high quality feed later on to do highlights if you want it. And then if the commentator audio is embedded in the camera already, then it's great for highlights. We don't have to sync it later on. It's already there. It's already mixed, and it's easier for us to handle later on.
Got it. So I'm just picturing this boat, since we're talking about the rowing, and all these people kind of packed into the boat, camera operator, commentators, somebody operating perhaps the Wirecast audio and the rest of it. And at the same time, somebody's got to be driving the boat, right? And you've got to have a quiet motor, right?
We would like a quiet motor, yes. We do our best with what we can. We try to get professional drivers, someone like assistant coaches for the teams we cover, because we've gotten into trouble before when the perfect position for a camera to cover rowing is slightly ahead of the race, but the preferred location for pretty much everyone else is slightly behind the race so that we don't create a wake and cause a problem. And so we try to not get in the way of what we stream and try to make sure that we give them whatever leeway we can.
Yeah. Makes sense. So, and then is the commentators are actually on the boat with audio and they're talking about it, so you're just trying to minimize the background noise as much as possible?
We try. I mean, they have little windscreens on their mics, and then, we try to do our best. It's usually not that big a deal. People understand that we're on a boat, and we've had these discussions in the past of, should we have everyone on the boat, which is what we do, or should we just have a camera in the boat and somehow send it back to the shore?
Right.
There are solutions out there for that. You can do point-to-point. You can do over cellular network. There are many ways you can do it. And so you still get the camera and the commentators are safely on the shore or even in the control room or somewhere else and calling it. But it doesn't feel real. It doesn't. They're not raising their voice to get over the noise of the river. Yeah. And you can tell that it sounds artificial. Yeah. And I like that they have to raise their voice a little bit to make sure that people can hear them. It sounds more real to me. And so that's why we do it like that.
Well, actually, audio is a whole fascinating topic to get into as well, and I don't think we'll have time to today. There was maybe we'll have to have you back on and talk about designing audio for live sports. There was a wonderful podcast by I think it was Hidden Design, or I forget the name of it. It's a podcast that's done out of the Bay Area, and they brought on the sound designers for the Olympics, for professional sports, and he talked about just the art of placing microphones during live sporting events, that you really, in order to make your viewers feel like they're there at the event, there's an art to it. And it was a very interesting episode. I'll have to send that over to you if you haven't listened to it.
Sure. So you mentioned before the challenge of working with students or interns who shuffle every 10 months. And I think audio is a great example of that because, if you talk to engineers, you hear this as well. Video is easier to troubleshoot because you can see it. You're sitting there in front of Wirecast, and if the video looks off, hopefully you care enough to see and fix it. If the tripod is not level, or if it's too blue, or if the camera operator isn't even following the game, you should say something and you see it. But audio is so much more difficult to monitor because you have to actively listen to it at all times, and you can't do that on a boat. You can't do that if you're doing a soccer production. You're in a press box with communications people and PA people, and there's a lot going on. And then we've had situations where the broadcast looks good, and then I ask the people who directed it later on, "Oh, how was the broadcast?" "It looked good. It was great." And you listen to it later on, and there's no ambient whatsoever. It's like the commentators are sitting inside a booth, which they are, and
there's no feeling of the audio that matches the video.
Right. It lacks depth. Besides not feeling like you're there, if there's an excitement, if someone gets a soccer goal or anything like that, you want to hear the fans cheer, you want to hear the celebration, you want to hear the coaches yelling. And that's not something that you can see in front of you. It's something you have to proactively think about. And even if you don't have, obviously, the budget that the Olympics have, and you can just do a shotgun mic on the camera or a couple of mics here and there to capture something, I think it makes a huge, huge difference. And it's something that is difficult to monitor, but it's something you have to plan for ahead of time and make sure that you maintain throughout.
Well, on that note, in your big productions and your, in theory, the ones you have the most resources for at the stadium, do you have microphones strategically placed throughout the stadium and on the field, or are you having to just throw shotguns on the cameras?
So it depends on the venue. For football, our cameras are in pretty good locations throughout, and it's an open stadium. There's nothing there. It's just concrete, and we have very good camera positions. And so it's just shotgun mics on the cameras. But for something like hockey, it's much trickier because there's glass everywhere that's surrounding the rink. And if you use shotgun mics, it reverberates off the glass, and it sounds weird. It sounds echoey, and it sounds like, because our cameras aren't very high, they don't always clear the glass. It sounds weird. And so we end up getting little mics to mount on the glass.
I've seen those. Yeah, I've seen those at other hockey games.
Yeah, boundary mics. And they provide a much fuller sound. And you can, it's a little artificial because you can tell when someone is skating towards the mic. You can tell that they're getting louder and louder. And I wonder why, because they're skating towards the mic. But it sounds much better. It sounds real, and it sounds like you're on the ice, which is funny because the whole point of audio is to make it feel like you're there. Well, no one is sitting on the ice. It's not sound that you really hear.
Yeah.
But it sounds genuine. It sounds like what people expect to hear when they watch pro sports on TV, so it helps us.
Well, and I was going to say, it's also something that I think we're trained to expect, because when you've seen enough, Olympic ice skating competitions and the rest of it, you're getting this sound with the video, and we've almost been trained to think that that's how it's supposed to sound, like we're on the ice too. Well, Imre, it's been a wonderful, wonderful time talking to you. We're out of time, but I really would like to unpack more about this with you another time. And I really appreciate you spending time with us today to talk about this. I'm noticing that people are in the comments are very excited about some of the stuff you talked about, and talked about their own sports loves and interests here. So thank you to everybody. If you have a question or you want to send it to us, where can people get a hold of you, or if they want to tweet at you with further questions about this?
Twitter is a good option. My Twitter handle is ImryH, IMRYH. I'm often on Twitter. I often tweet photos of what we're up to here in video production, and so tweeting at me is definitely a way to get me to answer a question. Okay, great. Yeah, I think people might be very interested to tweet at you with those questions. So at ImryH on Twitter. Imre, thanks so much for joining us today, and we will have you on again another time. I'd love to talk more about this stuff. Sounds good. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. Everybody, that was our show for today. And if you are at all curious about how to bring in score clocks and timers into Wirecast, we'll be covering that in our learning session, which is coming up. So stick around if you want to watch that. But for the rest of you, thanks for watching, and thanks to Imre for joining us.